Tomorrow night, 48 Hours Mystery looks at a cold case that turned hot again after more than 20 years.
The case involves a bite mark, a jealous ex-girlfriend, and a bombshell murder conviction. As Maureen Maher reports, the evidence led detectives to one of their own.
Obsession, deception, and kidnapping are the hallmarks of a good thriller. But what happens when life starts to imitate art? Today we look at 3 stories with plot twists ripped straight from a movie script. Hi, I'm Michael from Mysterious 7. Welcome back to another video of cases and some unexpected plot twists. Case number 1, The Ice-Cold Black Widow. Charming, sassy, and beautiful, Lynn Turner knew how to captivate. Described as fun-loving and lively, one fell easily under her spell. However, misfortune followed her at every step. Or was she the mistress of her own destiny? Lynn didn't have an ideal start in life. She was given up for adoption by her birth mother. The Womacs, who adopted her, later divorced, and trouble at home led her down the path of addiction. By the time she was a teenager, she had already been to a rehab clinic for her issues with substance abuse. But life was about to turn around for Lynn. She started working as a 911 dispatcher in the 1990s in Cobb County, Georgia. Her real ambition was to become a police officer. However, she failed the psychological exam. Enter Glenn Turner. Friends and family described Glenn as a big old fun-loving goof. He was a perfect gentleman and had his mindset on marrying before he turned 30. The Cobb County police officer was affectionately known as Buddha. His friends were shocked when he and Lynn sparked an instant attraction. Don Cawthon and Mike Archer, friends of Glenn, insisted it was just a physical attraction. Both men described Lynn as having a figure that could melt the coldest of hearts. Cawthon remembered seeing Lynn at a party in a dark blue outfit, carrying 2 pistols. She was a typical femme fatale. Lynn had a thing for a man in uniform and a passion for stock car racing, which was another thing she had in common with Glenn. Motorcycles and NASCAR were all that was on Glenn's mind, and meeting a good-looking woman who shared his interests amplified the attraction. Soon, Lynn was showering Glenn with lavish gifts and doggedly pursuing him. The attention dazzled Glenn, and he was blinded by her charm. He refused to see what his friends saw in Lynn. She was a cunning, if not manipulative, woman. Intent on marrying Lynn before he turned 30, they set a date for August 21st, 1993. Glenn's sister Linda Handy said it was an item on his mental checklist to be married by 30. Hardy had her reservations about Lynn, though, saying there was just something not right about her. All that time she was weaving her intricate little web. The wedding was a disaster. Glenn's siblings, Linda and James, said there was no joy. In his speech, James told the audience that it felt more like a funeral than a wedding. This was only the beginning of the downward spiral. No one expected their union to last, and they would be correct. The honeymoon was quickly over. Lynn cut Glenn off from those closest to him, going as far as to tell his mother, Kathy Turner, that she had nothing more to say to her regarding their decisions and relationship. Red flags were beginning to appear. Making no effort to bond with her new in-laws, another blow to his family came when Glenn told his mother that he was making Lynn the sole beneficiary of his life insurance policy. Marriage was not turning out to be the fairy tale Glenn had imagined. Soon he and Lynn were sleeping in separate rooms. She'd left her job and was spending more and more time away from home, raking up credit card bills and sparking rumors of an affair. Eventually, Glenn had to take on other jobs in order to support his wife's expensive lifestyle. However, Lynn showed no interest in patching things between them. Glenn had finally had enough. He decided the marriage was not working and was considering filing for divorce. That move proved fatal. Glenn suddenly developed a terrible bout of the flu. He was violently sick, with severe cramping and vomiting. When Lynn went into the hospital to have a bump checked, Glenn went along. Doctors said he was severely dehydrated and required bed rest. He was sent home. On March 3, 1995, Glenn Turner, age 31, was found dead in his bed. Suspicion quickly fell on Lynn, particularly by family and friends. Authorities ruled out foul play, and the medical examiner concluded his death was natural. It was caused by an enlarged heart. At the funeral, while friends and family mourned for the loss of Glenn, Lynn appeared upbeat, almost impatient. She was seen giggling and laughing among her friends, even holding a male officer's hand. En route to the cemetery from the church, Lynn actually called to inquire about life insurance. Soon after, Lynn moved in with her boyfriend, Randy Thompson. She collected $153,000 in life insurance and pension, and Glenn became a distant memory. Randy Thompson was a Forsyth County firefighter, another man in uniform that Lynn latched onto. They'd been having an affair during her marriage to Glenn. After his death, they bought a house together, but did not marry. Randy Thompson was going through a rough patch when he met Lynn Turner. Vivacious, attractive, and fun-loving, she was a much-needed distraction. Quickly, their relationship began to get serious. Spending almost every weekend together, a fling turned into a commitment. Soon enough, Lynn was over for Christmas, taking Randy and his buddies to the Daytona 500 and booking themselves and another couple on a cruise. Randy's family worried that his new girlfriend was getting a bit too close too soon, but if Randy was happy, so be it. While in the dating stage, Lynn spoiled Randy with gifts that left his family floored. Angie Thompson, Randy's sister, described Lynn as a consumer tornado when it came to shopping. All the while, she kept a little secret. Lynn never revealed she was married. She had told people she was either divorced or widowed, and that she'd inherited money from her grandmother's will. 6 years would pass, and they remained together, tangled in a web of lies. If she remarried, Lynn would no longer be eligible to collect Glenn's death benefits, so Lynn and Randy remained unmarried. Together, Randy and Lynn had a son and a daughter, but by the 2000s, their relationship had reached a breaking point. Lynn turned from dream girl to nightmare. They bickered and argued constantly. Randy's family took to calling them the Bickersons. Randy found the negativity that Lynn was bringing to his life to be exhausting. He had had enough. Randy eventually moved out, but could not escape Lynn's wrath. At age 32, Randy Thompson was found dead in his apartment on January 22, 2001. Just like Glenn, he had reported having flu symptoms and visited the ER complaining of stomach aches and vomiting. He too was sent back home. Back at home, Lynn dutifully cared for him, even making him Jell-O. He was dead the next day. This time, though, the payout was significantly less. Lynn received $36,000, not the $200,000 she was expecting. The policy had lapsed. Enter Mike Archer. Mike Archer had taken a job at a car dealership. He'd received a request for a car needed for a funeral, the funeral of Randy Thompson, Forsyth County firefighter, Lynn Turner's live-in boyfriend, the father to her 2 children. After a bit of sleuthing, Archer discovered that Randy died in a similar circumstance to Glenn. Archer, along with Glenn's family, tried to get both cases reopened to investigate Glenn's death alongside Randy's, but they were unsuccessful. It was Glenn's mother, Kathy, who took it upon herself to make contact with Randy's mother, Nita Thompson. The two mothers compared notes, and Lynn's lies began to reveal themselves as the truth quickly came into focus. Lynn was having an affair with Randy while still married to Glenn. She had showered him with expensive gifts, in a similar fashion to how she wooed Glenn. Upon receiving the insurance payout from Glenn's death, Lynn used that money to fund her romance with Randy. Having done the legwork, Thompson's body was exhumed after a petition by the family. A second look at tissue samples found oxalate crystals present in his kidneys and liver. These findings indicated the presence of ethylene glycol, commonly used in antifreeze. Randy's death was now being investigated as a suspected homicide. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation stepped in to take over the case. Agents reopened Glenn's case in Cobb County as well. After his body was exhumed, the same oxalate crystals were found. He too was poisoned using antifreeze. Lynn Turner was arrested. During the highly publicized trial, that shocking evidence was presented. Lynn had approached a veterinary office to make inquiries about euthanizing stray animals. The technician testified that Lynn asked if antifreeze would kill cats the same way it killed dogs. In 2004, Lynn stood trial for Glenn's murder and was found guilty of murder in the first degree. In 2007, she was once again sentenced to life imprisonment without parole for the murder of Randy. Both sets of juries concluded that Lynn was motivated purely by money. She may have escaped the death penalty, but her end was just as satisfying. 3 years after her second conviction, she was found unresponsive in her cell. On August 30th, 2010, Lynn Turner was pronounced dead. She had allegedly saved up her blood pressure medication and ingested a large dose all at once. Her death was ruled a suicide. Both Kathy Turner and Nita Thompson, the mothers of the victims, agreed that what goes around comes around eventually, and that her suicide was an admittance of her guilt. Case number 2. The little girl lost. The birth of a child brings immense joy to parents. For Luzeda Cuevas and Pedro Vera, that simple pleasure turned to torture. 10 days after their daughter, Delamar Vera, a fire broke out in their North Philadelphia home. The blaze began in the baby's room, engulfing the upper story of the house. Cuevas and Vera both tried frantically to save their daughter. However, the flames and smoke overwhelmed them. When the fire department finally arrived and put out the fire, the room had been burned to ashes. When the smoke cleared, no traces of baby Delamar were found. It was concluded that the child simply perished in the fire. Perhaps the language barrier and miscommunication led to misunderstandings. Luz believed her daughter was kidnapped. A mother's unrelenting belief would eventually reveal the truth. Let's take a look back at a case so bizarre that it eventually became a movie. In December 1997, Luz Cuevas and her boyfriend Pedro Vera were ecstatic. They had just welcomed their baby girl Delamar into the world. But then tragedy struck when their home went up in flames. 6 years later, Cuevas attended a birthday party for a child of a family friend. There she met a little girl who looked familiar. Her name was Elia Hernandez. The resemblance between Elia and Cuevas' other children was uncanny. She even reminded her of a younger version of herself. Elia had taken a liking to Cuevas. Thinking quickly, Cuevas pretended that she'd found bubblegum stuck in the girl's hair and offered to remove it. She discreetly plucked out a few strands and bagged the hair to send off for DNA testing. The results astounded everyone. Elia Hernandez was Delamar Vera. A twist of fate had led Cuevas to a party where she finally found her daughter. Delamar had risen from the ashes like a mythical phoenix. Investigations led authorities to one Carolyn Correa. She was the woman who had been raising Delamar as her own daughter since her disappearance and presumed death. Correa was known to both Cuevas and Vera. She was related to Vera through marriage. The night before the fire, Correa had been to visit the family. She then returned the next day claiming to have left her purse behind. It was on this second visit that the fire had been started. Through investigations, police concluded that Correa had set fire next to the baby's crib before stealing her away. This was done to cover up the crime. Correa was a New Jersey woman who claimed to be pregnant around the time of Delamar's disappearance. She and her partner, Andre Moore, were expecting a little girl they named Elia. Correa is alleged to have given birth at home, alone, 3 days prior to Delamar's disappearance. It is unclear whether or not she was actually ever pregnant, though many people, including her partner Andre and eldest daughter, claim to have seen Correa with the baby before the fire. After abducting Delamar, Correa returned to Willingboro, New Jersey. For the next 6 years, she continued to raise the child as her own, naming her Elia. All the while, Delamar, or Elia, was just a few miles across the Delaware River from her biological family. They did have their suspicions that Correa may have kidnapped Delamar. However, they claim the opportunity to gather the proof did not present itself. In the meantime, Cuevas and Vera had a second child, but their relationship did not last. Over the years, varying accounts of the actual incident emerged. First, a rumor of an affair between Correa and Vera surfaced. The discrepancy was that the parents themselves alleged they could not find the accused kidnapper, but knew who it was. Relatives came forward to say that the parents always knew where Correa lived. Many said that Correa even brought the little girl to several family parties attended by Cuevas and Vera. Moreover, Cuevas was alleged to have kept her findings of the girl to herself for over a year before informing authorities. She was believed to have lied about which birthday party she met Elia at, and several family members saying that she had not been at the birthday party that year, but rather the previous year. Cuevas had come under fire for her inconsistent account of the events. Her version differs from that of Vera, neighbors, friends, and family. Cuevas' attorney, Anthony Cianfrani, said that even if it is the truth, people's memory of such events always differ. The evidence support Cuevas' claims, and Correa was arrested and charged with kidnapping and arson. The trial opened up further complications. In her defense, her lawyers argued that Correa suffered from a psychotic condition. They believed her biological baby may have been stillborn. Correa may have had a mental breakdown and stolen the child to raise as her own. Her attorney, Jeffrey Zucker, said Correa paid an independent lab to test her DNA. He argued in her defense that if she didn't believe she was the child's mother, Why would she spend so much money to prove it? Mary Lou Puchalis, Korea's best friend, claimed that the woman had no idea she had stolen a baby. Puchalis said Korea was hysterical when the DNA results proved Alia was in fact Delamar. She'd apparently asked Puchalis where her baby was, if Alea wasn't really hers. Korea claimed to believe that she was raising her own child and not another woman's. In court, however, Korea went on to argue that Pedro Vera had willingly given the child to her. He has denied this claim, refuting that he was an accomplice to Korea's crime. Korea was charged with kidnapping, arson, and concealing a child. Her bail was set at $1 million. She was charged and sentenced to 9 to 30 years in prison. Korea was eligible for parole in 2014, however, it was denied. She remains in prison under protection as she has become suicidal. Although Cuevas and Vera are no longer together, they both agreed to joint custody of Delamar. As of recently, Delamar is all grown up and living her best life. If going by her Instagram account is anything, she is surrounded by people who love her and is happy. Number 3. Deadly Love Triangle. Everyone looks to the police to uphold the law and protect society. What happens then when an officer takes the law into their own hands? Stephanie Lazarus was one such individual. She is the epitome of what happens when love turns into obsession. For 25 years, Stephanie Lazarus climbed to ranks in her law enforcement career. She started her career as a patrol cop and ended up making detective for the LAPD. Respected by her peers, Stephanie excelled in her job. By age 51, she had, by all accounts, covered all the desired posts available to police officers looking to climb the ladder. She'd worked in the Drug Abuse Resistance Education Unit, she'd been a homicide detective, and even worked in internal affairs. Stephanie had started the department's child care program and initiated the Child Safety and Identification program. She was a go-getter, and the law was her guiding light. In her time as an LAPD officer, she had followed all the rules and done everything by the book. There was not even a disciplinary hearing to blemish her squeaky clean record. Until the morning of June 5, 2009. As she entered the LAPD administration building to start her day, she was summoned to a suspect interrogation room by fellow detective Dan Jaramillo. Stephanie, now an art theft division detective, followed willingly, anything to help. They chatted as they would on any normal day. That day, though, the tables were going to be turned. Stephanie entered the basement interrogation room, seeing fellow detective Greg Stearns already seated. Both men directed her to the chair reserved for suspects being questioned. Still, nothing seemed amiss. When Jaramillo said he needed to speak with her regarding a case in which her name came up, the cogs in her head began to turn slowly. They asked her one question. Did she know John Rutan? Stephanie's carefully manicured life was about to come unglued. She knew John. She knew him very well. She was the reason that John Rutan was a young widower. In November 1985, John Rutan had married Sherry Rasmussen. John and Sherry were a young, successful, and a beautifully matched couple. Sherry was 2 years older at age 27 when she and John met in the summer of 1984. No denying it, it was love at first sight. Sherry was already a director of nursing at the Glendale Adventist Medical Center. John, a graduate of UCLA, had started a new job at an engineering company. Their marriage was untroubled. After a whirlwind holiday with both sets of their parents, they were blissfully settling into newlywed life by the following year. When John left home for work on February 24, 1986, he kissed his wife goodbye as she slept in a bit longer. Little did he know that that was the last kiss they'd share. Sherry had been reluctant to go into work that day and was considering calling in sick. Throughout the day, John tried calling her. After receiving no answer, he'd assumed she'd given in and gone to the hospital. John called Sherry's office, but her secretary told him she had not come in that morning. He continued with his day, picking up the laundry in the evening before returning home. Sherry's car wasn't in the driveway, but there were shards of broken glass left behind. Sherry probably had another incident, he thought. She had dinged her car a while back. It wasn't until he walked up the garage stairs and found the inner living room door open that he knew something was wrong. Sherry lay dead on the living room floor. She was on her back on a brown rug. Her face was swollen, battered, and bloody. Sherry was still in her bathrobe and barefoot, a bullet hole just visible above her camisole. John's world fell apart in that instant. Sherry was gone. She had no pulse. The life he envisioned with her was shattered. John called the police. The crime scene was chaotic. A speaker had been knocked over and a vase found shattered on the floor. Sherry had put up a fight. Shelves were knocked askew and a VCR and CD player were left neatly stacked at the foot of the staircase. The items left behind in a failed robbery attempt, perhaps. Blood was smeared on the walls and the front door. One of the glass doors leading to the balcony was shattered. However, there was no sign of forced entry or hurried ransacking of the home. Lyle Mayer, the detective investigating the case, identified 2 of the 3 bullet wounds on Sherry's body as contact wounds. She had been shot at point-blank range. A quilted blanket showed signs of powder burns. It had been used to muffle one of the shots being fired. 2 bullets were recovered from Sherry's body. Both were .38 caliber. The third one had passed through her body completely. Whoever wanted to kill Sherry meant business. All 3 of the shots to her body were fatal. A bite mark was found on her inner left forearm. It was swabbed for saliva samples and a cast made to compare with tooth impressions. As investigations proceeded, John was questioned on his whereabouts. Under the supervision of Detective Mayer, interviews were carried out with family members and neighbors. Conclusions were drawn from reports of 2 Latin men alleged to be carrying out robberies in the area, going as far as assaulting one of their female victims. Mayer later told John that he had been ruled out as a suspect. Sherry was simply a victim of a burglary gone horribly wrong. Mayer explained that Sherry had probably surprised them while they were in their process of robbing the place. For Mayer, this would be his opinion, one he held on to stubbornly until his retirement. He had asked John if there had been any problems in the marriage. None, said John. They were happily married. Mayer also inquired if there were any jealous ex-lovers. John said no. Sherry's case went cold. John, however, had a secret. He'd kept the seriousness of this secret away from Sherry. His secret was Stephanie Lazarus. John and Stephanie had been friends while they both attended UCLA. Both stayed in the same dormitory and maintained the same circle of friends. Naturally, they'd gravitated toward each other, having shared similar interests in fitness and sports. Their relationship, though, was not normal by conventional standards. For John, Stephanie was a good friend whom he dated casually. He did not see himself in a long-term relationship with her. Stephanie, however, saw things very differently. Having shared an intimate relationship with John, Stephanie assumed they were a serious couple. John and Stephanie were clearly not on the same page. Over the span of their relationship, Stephanie became obsessed with John. She envisioned a future in which they'd be happily sailing off into the sunset. Her only dark cloud on the horizon, Sherry Rasmussen. John had made it clear to Stephanie that he was not looking for anything serious. When Sherry entered the picture, though, his plan changed. This news shattered Stephanie, who, by at that time, had begun work as an officer for the LAPD. During John and Sherry's courtship, Stephanie continued to harass the couple. She went as far as to turn up at the home they shared and stalked Sherry at work. She often threatened Sherry using tactics of intimidation. Sherry's family were well aware of the harassment and the trouble that Stephanie Lazarus was causing. Sherry had even confronted John about the situation. He, however, said that Stephanie was a wild card and he just needed to placate her until they could finally move away and be married. Little did Sherry know that John was giving in to Stephanie's demands in order to keep their relationship safe. John later revealed to Sherry that he had slept with Stephanie once last time, as she promised to leave them alone afterward. Forgiving in nature, Sherry reluctantly accepted his explanation, and the torture inflicted on their lives slowly abated. That is, until their lives were forever torn apart on February 24, 1986. The murder of Sherry Rasmussen went cold after Detective Mayer concluded that it was the result of a botched burglary. The Rasmussen family, however, never gave up. Nels Rasmussen, Sherry's father, was quick to point out Stephanie Lazarus as a potential suspect. He'd told Detective Mayer that John's ex-girlfriend, the lady cop, should be investigated. Despite Nels's continuous outcry for help, no one took his concerns seriously. There is also the belief that Nels' questions and comments led to a cover-up by those working on the case to protect a fellow police officer. Much of the records pertaining to the interview with Nels and Mayer have been misplaced or lost. Over the years, Nels continued his pursuit for justice for his daughter. During an interview with Mayer and his partner Steve Hooks, Nels brought up the fact that Sherry could have not possibly fought off 2 men for such a protracted amount of time. Hooks mused that the bite mark found on Sherry was more indicative of a woman attacking rather than a man. He added that women, more often than men, tend to be biters when attacking. Mayer dismissed this by stating that women do not engage in breaking and entering incidents, and that men too had been known to bite during fights. When Nels once again brought up Stephanie Lazarus, both Mayer and Hooks said that the line of inquiry had been closed. Someone had allegedly spoken to her, but nothing more came of the interview. Sherry Rasmussen's case became so cold that it was in danger of freezing over if something wasn't done soon. It was 2 decades later that advancements in DNA and detectives who were not blinded by peer pressure finally cracked the case. Criminalist Jennifer Francis was part of a cold case homicide unit formed by LA Police Chief Bernard C. Parks back in 2001. While sifting through the pile of cold cases, she stumbled upon Sherry's. What perplexed Francis was that the file stated a swab was taken from a bite mark found on the victim. The swab, however, was not listed as evidence. Searching the freezers physically, Francis and her team located the missing evidence. Years had caused some damage, but the sample was still good enough to be tested. Nothing came up on the National Criminal Database, CODIS, but markers indicated the DNA belonged to a woman. Mayer's entire theory on the investigation had just been thrown out of the window. The question was raised, should Sherry's case be re-examined based on the new evidence? It was 4 years later when Detective Jim Nuttall from the Van Nuys Homicide Department reopened the case. What caught his attention was a note made by Francis that retired Detective Mayer's theory of 2 men killing Sherry was probably wrong. The DNA pointed to a woman being involved. Detective Nuttall and his team pored over the crime scene evidence and retraced the steps of the former investigators. Whoever killed Sherry tried to make the murder look like a botched robbery. Nuttall and his team were beginning to think that Stephanie Lazarus was the missing puzzle piece they needed to solve this case. A visit to Sherry's widower, John, gave detectives the information they needed to run with the case. John explained Nels' theory of Stephanie being the killer and the subsequent police cover-up. Stephanie Lazarus, impeccable detective and outstanding citizen, was finally linked through DNA testing to the murder of Sherry Rasmussen. The samples collected and kept from the original crime scene were tested against DNA lifted from her workplace. The concerns of Nels Rasmussen had finally fallen into the lap of new detectives determined to blow open this tightly shut case. After much investigation, detectives were able to reconstruct the day. It had been a day off for Stephanie. She knew well enough Sherry was alone. She faked a robbery scene and used gloves. She later reported her on-duty gun stolen to the Santa Monica Police Department, a .38 caliber Smith & Wesson. Stephanie denied any involvement in Sherry's death. In March 2012, Stephanie Lazarus was sentenced to 27 years to life for the murder of Sherry Rasmussen. The Rasmussen family have since sued both Lazarus and the LAPD. However, an internal investigation proved that no one internally tried to protect Stephanie during the investigation. Life imitating art or art imitating life? What are your views in these cases with the most insane plot twists? Tell us in the comments below. Until next time, stay safe, mysterious viewers.